Story number 1. It was just another late night shift for me, delivering food around the quiet streets of the town. I've been doing this job for a while now, working solo. There's something about the stillness of night that's both peaceful and unsettling. But that night, something felt different. I had just dropped off an order in a particularly desolate part of town. The streets were empty, the houses dark. I remember feeling a chill that wasn't just from the cold air. Shaking it off, I headed back to my car, ready for the next delivery. As I drove to the next address, I couldn't help but notice the lack of life in this part of the city. It was eerily silent, almost like a ghost town. I arrived at the destination, an old, dimly lit house at the end of a narrow street. Something about it made me uneasy, but I brushed it off as just my imagination. Walking up to the front door, I could feel the weight of the silence around me. I knocked and waited. No answer. I knocked again, a bit louder this time. Still nothing. I was about to leave when I heard a faint noise from the backyard. Curiosity getting the better of me, I decided to check it out. As I made my way around the house, the noise grew clearer. It was some kind of a shuffling sound. My heart started to race, but I convinced myself it was probably just an animal. Reaching the backyard, I realized how wrong I was. There, in the shadows, I saw a figure. It was too dark to make out who or what it was, but it was definitely there, watching me. I froze, unsure of what to do next. The figure didn't move, just stood there in the darkness. The air grew colder, or maybe it was just fear gripping me. Suddenly, my phone rang, shattering the silence. I fumbled to answer it, my eyes still fixed on the shadowy figure. It was the restaurant, asking if I had completed the delivery. That moment of distraction was all it took. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I rushed back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop to look back. The rest of the night was a blur. I kept thinking about that figure, that feeling of being watched. It was a reminder that in the quiet of the night, you're never really alone. Since then, I've never felt quite at ease during my night shifts. I always wonder what was lurking in the shadows that night and what might have happened if my phone had not rung at that moment. Story number 2. Working as a late-night food delivery driver, I've seen my share of odd things, but nothing compares to that misty evening. The air was thick with fog, making the streets look like something out of a ghost story. I remember the chill that crept up my spine as I drove through the nearly deserted town, my headlights barely cutting through the dense mist. My next delivery was to a remote area on the outskirts of town. The GPS took me down an old, winding road surrounded by dense woods. The deeper I drove, the more isolated I felt. I could barely see a few feet ahead, and the silence was only broken by the sound of my car's engine. It felt like I was heading into another world. As I neared the destination, the GPS signal flickered and died, leaving me to navigate on my own. I slowed down, trying to make out any landmark that could guide me. That's when I noticed a figure standing by the roadside, barely visible through the fog. I stopped the car, wondering if they needed help. The figure was motionless, just a silhouette in the mist. I called out, asking if they were okay, but there was no response. Just an eerie silence. Something about the situation felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, a whisper carried through the fog, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It sounded like a warning, but the words were indistinct. My heart raced as I looked around, but the figure had vanished. I felt a surge of fear and decided to turn back, but when I tried to start the car, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. I was alone, stuck in this eerie place with a mysterious figure and whispering voices. Then, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I locked the doors and braced myself, not knowing what to expect. The footsteps grew louder and closer. Just as the footsteps reached the car, they suddenly stopped. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity, I mustered the courage to look outside. The road was empty. The figure was gone, and the whispering had ceased. Somehow, the car started on its first try this time. I drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the safety of the town. To this day, I can't explain what happened on that road. Was it my imagination or something else? I still shiver at the thought of that night, the whispers, and the vanishing figure. It's a mystery that continues to haunt me. Story number 3. My job as a late-night food delivery guy always had its share of eerie moments, but none as haunting as that cold, starless night. The streets were unusually quiet as I made my way through the town. A feeling of unease was creeping over me, but I attributed it to the solitary nature of my job. The night air was crisp, and a faint mist had begun to form. My next delivery was to a new neighborhood on the edge of town, one I wasn't familiar with. The houses here were spaced far apart, and the streetlights were few and far between. As I pulled up to the address, the unsettling silence of the area made me feel like I was the only soul for miles. I got out of the car, package in hand, and walked to the front door. The house was dark, adding to the night's unsettling feel. I rang the bell and waited. No answer. I rang again, but still nothing. That's when I noticed something odd. The house next door had its window open, and I could swear I saw movement inside. I got curious and walked towards it. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper coming from the open window. It sounded like a plea, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart started to race. Was someone in trouble, or was it a trick of the wind? As I stood there trying to decipher the whispers, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. It was as if someone or something was watching me. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing, just the empty, silent street. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my concern for someone possibly in distress held me there. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move across the window of the dark house I was supposed to deliver to. My breath caught in my throat. The shadow was too quick to identify, but it was unmistakably there. Fear and curiosity battled within me. I decided to investigate the shadow. As I approached the house, the door creaked open, on its own, or so it seemed. Hesitantly, I stepped inside, calling out to see if anyone was there. The house was silent, save for the sound of my breathing. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, and just as I decided to turn back, the door slammed shut behind me. Panic set in. I was alone, in a dark, unknown house, and something didn't feel right. I fumbled for my phone to use as a light, but it was futile. After what felt like hours, but were only minutes, I managed to find a window and escape. I didn't look back until I was safely in my car, driving away from that haunted place. Story number 4. Being a late-night food delivery driver, I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepared me for that night's eerie encounter. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the city in an unnerving darkness. I remember the streets being unusually empty, adding to the night's ominous feel. I was heading to a delivery in a part of town known for its old, Victorian-style houses. The GPS led me down a narrow cobblestone street, lined with tall, ancient trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. As I drove, I felt an inexplicable sense of being watched, but every time I looked in the rearview mirror, there was nothing but darkness. Upon reaching the address, I parked my car and grabbed the delivery bag. The house was large and looked abandoned, with windows boarded up and the garden overgrown. I hesitated, wondering if I had the wrong place, but the address matched. As I approached the door, a chilling breeze swept past me, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. I paused, listening, but it was gone as quickly as it came. I rang the bell and waited, feeling increasingly uneasy. The house remained silent, like it was holding its breath. Just as I decided to leave, a shadow moved behind one of the boarded windows. My heart skipped a beat. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I pressed my ear against the door, listening. The whisper returned, clearer this time, like a hushed conversation. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like two voices, one calm and one frantic. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I knocked again, louder this time, and the whispering stopped abruptly. It was replaced by slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from inside. I stepped back, ready to run, but the door remained closed. The footsteps seemed to pace back and forth behind the door. I was frozen in place, torn between fleeing and the need to know what was happening inside. Just then, a loud crash from inside the house jolted me out of my trance. Without a second thought, I dashed back to my car and sped away. In the rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing in the doorway of the house, watching me leave. My mind raced with questions. Who or what was that figure? What were those whispers? I never found out what lurked inside that house. The experience left me shaken, and I avoided that street in my future deliveries. The memory of the shadow and the whispers lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder of the unknown dangers that can hide in the darkness. Story number 5. Delivering food late at night often leads me through forgotten parts of the city. But one night I found myself on a route that felt unsettlingly unfamiliar. The sky was a deep, starless black, and the streetlights seemed to flicker with a rhythm that set my nerves on edge. The houses along this street were old and appeared uninhabited, their windows like dark, watchful eyes. As I drove, the GPS signal flickered and then went dead. I was left navigating by the dim light of the street lamps. The further I went, the more the buildings seemed to lean in, as if trying to whisper secrets. A thick fog started to come in, covering my car and hiding everything around me. I arrived at the delivery address, a house that looked more run down than the rest. The garden was overgrown, and the gate creaked ominously as I pushed it open. As I walked up the path, I heard the faint sound of music playing somewhere inside the house. It was an old tune, crackling like a record from another era. The music seemed out of place, adding to the house's eerie ambiance. I knocked on the front door, but there was no response. I knocked again, louder. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about this house didn't feel right. Unnerved by the silence, I decided to leave the food at the door and return to my car. As I turned to leave, I saw a shadow move past a second-story window. It was quick, but unmistakable. My heart raced. I didn't know if I should investigate or leave. My curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously made my way around to the back of the house, looking for any signs of life. The backyard was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from a basement window. I peered inside and saw what looked like the faint outline of a figure, standing perfectly still. It sent a wave of fear through me. Suddenly, the figure in the basement moved, turning towards the window. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its gaze on me. I stumbled backward, my instincts screaming at me to get away. I ran back to my car, not daring to look back. As I drove away, I saw the front door of the house slowly opening in my rearview mirror. I never found out who or what was in that house. That night still haunts me, the image of the figure and the opening door etched into my memory. It was a reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved, especially on the forgotten routes of the night shift.